So, on platform 1 of Paddington train station in London, there's a statue of the unknown soldier. He's standing there on a plinth. He's dressed in his full infantryman uniform. He's wearing an enormous greatcoat. He has a scarf that he's got wrapped around his neck that someone has sent him from home. And he's just torn a letter out of an envelope, and he's reading it. Who's that letter from? What does it say? 2 years ago, my collaborator Neil Bartlett and I were commissioned by an organization called 1418 Now, which was commissioning artists to respond to the centenary of the First World War. So we were commissioned to create a digital war memorial, an online artwork that marked the centenary. Now, Neil knew the statue well already, but I often use Paddington Station to commute, to come down here. And before I embarked on working on the project, I'd never really noticed him before. But he's a very beautiful work of art. So our idea was simple. If you could say whatever you wanted to say to the unknown soldier, if you could write that letter to him, what would you say? So that was our project, to create a digital war memorial, inviting everyone, and by that we meant everyone, to write their letter to the unknown soldier. We wanted to run the project for 5 weeks only, from the 28th of June 2014, which is the centenary of the anniversary of the centenary of the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, which is one of the sort of trigger events for the war. And then we decided we would close it 5 weeks later on the 4th of August, which was the centenary of Britain's declaration of war on Germany. So Neil isn't here with me today, so I thought we'd have a few words from him about the unknown soldier.
One of the strangest things about this particular war is that despite the fact that so many hundreds of thousands of people were killed, no bodies were ever brought back to this country. There were just too many of them, and too many that couldn't be identified. So there were no graves. But people needed somewhere that they could go to mourn. They needed somewhere that they could put their feelings. On the 7th of November 1920, they dug up an anonymous body from one of the battlefields of France and brought it back to cross the Channel to Westminster Abbey. It was buried under a marble slab. It said that this unknown soldier was unknown in both rank and name. The one body that was going to stand in for all the rest. In the first week, nearly 1.3 million people went there to pay their respects. Now that meant that when the Great Western Railway Company decided to put up their memorial to all the company employees who'd been killed in the First War, here on platform 1 at Paddington Station, everybody would have known who that statue was. It was the unknown soldier.
So, we issued our invitation, we sort of made our promise about this project, and we're in at the deep end, because as you know, asking people to write a letter is not the same as sharing something on social media. It's a much bigger thing to ask people to do. And as well as that, Neil and I were very aware of the pitfalls around a project like this. We very much wanted to avoid nostalgia. We wanted to avoid xenophobia. We wanted to avoid glorification of the war. But also we were interested in rethinking the narrowly defined rituals around remembrance. The 2-minute silence, which we'll be observing after my talk, we were concerned to enable people to try to rethink what remembrance means to you. We wanted people to think into that 2-minute silence, and we wanted people to indeed write into that 2-minute silence. So that was quite a big undertaking. So our first step was to commission 50 writers. We worked really hard on this set of commissions. It was a very fun part of the project. It's like, who are your 50 favorite writers? Write to them and ask them to write a letter to the unknown soldier. So we tried hard to achieve gender parity and get a really diverse and interesting list of writers. We commissioned poets, playwrights, journalists, novelists, former poet laureate Andrew Motion, the children's laureate Mallory Blackman, the poet Benjamin Zephaniah, a great list of people. Our next step was to try to build our website. And indeed, this was an incredible challenge because we were trying to do three quite contradictory things at the same time. The website is our digital war memorial. It is our artwork. So we wanted our website to be beautiful and contemporary and fresh looking. It also had to be very accessible because the website was where people would go to read letters to the unknown soldier and think about their own letter to the unknown soldier and indeed write their letter to the soldier. So it had to be very easy to use and clear. But we also had to create a website that was kind of creating an archive of the project at the same time as creating the project itself. So we had to think about how to make the website searchable and indeed how to make it shareable. So like I said, three quite contradictory things. We hired a team of 8 editorial moderators. They were all students at the university that I work at, and we hired them for a couple of reasons. One, we knew that we'd need help. We hoped to really achieve scale with this project, but we wanted every single letter that was sent to us to be read. But we also had concerns about online vandalism, the sort of darker side of what goes on the internet. So we got our moderators into place. And so we launched. We started out 28th of June, 20 letters came into us, and we thought, oh no, we're not going to achieve the scale we want if we're going to get 20 letters a day. But then things started to happen. We worked hard on social media with spreading the word around. We had good engagement from the press, the papers, as well as local radio, national radio, and indeed television. And we heard a couple of days into the project that the Prime Minister was going to write a letter. And of course, what happens when the Prime Minister writes a letter is that all the other politicians want to write their letters as well. So things began to slowly take off. Joanna Lumley, who's up there now, you see her there with her letter and a unit of Gurkha recruits who all wrote their letters as well. And we sort of had champions throughout the country who helped us work with all kinds of groups, from serving forces to schools to the Women's Institute to writing groups, etc., up and down the country. And the letters started to come in, and it went from 20 a day to dozens a day to hundreds a day, and indeed eventually a thousand a day on a few days. We had some wonderful sort of artworks happen inspired by our project. And this is one of them. This is a school in Hampshire called Bohunt School, where 1,100 students pasted their letters onto red pieces of paper, and 100 students from a primary school put theirs onto black. The maths department figured out how to make this giant poppy in the field, and we had it photographed from the air. This is a media wall at Baspal Uni, where we created a data visualization work of art where as each letter arrived in the back end of the website, it would appear on the tree, and as that word was reused, the leaf would get bigger and bigger until eventually it would fall. And that happened during the 5 weeks of the project as well. One of the surprises of the project was that we had thousands of print letters come to us through the post. Thousands of handwritten letters came to us. And indeed, this became one of the main jobs of the editorial moderators. We had none of the problems that we'd anticipated to do with vandalism. That was not a feature of the project at all. And indeed, the editorial moderators had to spend a lot of time scanning letters that came to us in the post. In the end, we had 22,000 letters to the soldier came into the project. The youngest participant was 3.5, the oldest was 91. And the whole project has been archived by the British Library. But for Neil and I, the project really was an extraordinarily moving thing to be taking part in. We were continually surprised by the power and the beauty of what people were writing to the unknown soldier. Every day we'd sit down first thing in the morning and read a whole swath of letters in order to choose our 6 letters that we would feature on the front of the website every day. And every day it was a really overwhelming and powerful and interesting experience. It was a great pleasure to be involved in the project. So I'll end now with just by reading one of the letters. We did a book with HarperCollins where Neil and I chose 138 of our favorite letters. So this letter is by Patricia Taylor, who lives in Colchester. Date, November 1918. Dear Walter, great news, war has ended. Date, May 1945. Dear Walter, great news, war has ended. Date, 2014. Dear Walter, news not great, war never ends. Hey Walter, great news, you will never be forgotten. Thank you.